rich teen spit on a waitress. He didn't know 10 Hells Angels were watching. The country club's golden boy thought he was untouchable. Trust fund, expensive car, parents who bought him out of every problem. When he spit in a waitress's face for bringing the wrong water, he smirked at her tears. He didn't notice the 10 leather-clad men in the corner booth who had just stopped eating. What happened in the next 60 seconds taught him a lesson his daddy's money couldn't buy. And what happened over the next 30 days, it changed his life forever. The summer sun blazed over the tourist town of Cedar Bay, California, a picturesque coastal community where wealthy families owned vacation homes and where the seasonal influx of money kept the local economy thriving from Memorial Day through Labor Day. It was the kind of place where Ferraris shared parking lots with fishing boats, where multi-million-dollar homes overlooked the same beaches that locals had enjoyed for generations, and where the gap between the haves and have-nots was visible in every interaction. The Ocean View Grill sat right on the main street that led to the marina, perfectly positioned to capture both the tourist trade and the locals who appreciated good food at reasonable prices. It had been there for 37 years, owned by the Castellano family, who had built it from nothing into one of the most beloved restaurants in Cedar Bay. The food was excellent, fresh seafood, generous portions, honest cooking that didn't try to be fancy but was always delicious. The atmosphere was casual and welcoming, with nautical decorations and big windows that offered views of the harbor. Maya Rodriguez had been working at the Ocean View Grill for 2 years, ever since she turned 16 and could legally get a work permit. Now 18 and freshly graduated from Cedar Bay High School, she was working double shifts all summer to save money for college. She had been accepted to UC Santa Barbara with a partial scholarship, but she still needed to come up with $15,000 for her first year's expenses. Her mother, Elena, worked as a housekeeper for several of the wealthy families in town, and her father, Carlos, worked construction when he could find jobs. But money was always tight in the Rodriguez household. Maya was the oldest of 4 children, and she took her responsibility as a role model seriously. She maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, volunteered at the local food bank, tutored younger students, and never complained about working long hours at the restaurant. She was small, barely 5 feet 2 inches, with dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, quick brown eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that made customers feel welcome and appreciated. Everyone who worked at the Ocean View Grill liked Maya. She was reliable, hardworking, always willing to take extra shifts, and she treated every customer with the same courtesy, regardless of whether they left generous tips or stiffed her completely. Tony Castellano, the owner, told his wife Maria that Maya was the kind of employee you built a business around, responsible beyond her years, with the kind of work ethic that couldn't be taught. The regular customers loved her too. The fishermen who came in for early breakfast knew she'd have their coffee poured before they sat down. The elderly couples who came for the early bird special appreciated that she remembered their names and asked about their grandchildren. Even the demanding tourists generally left satisfied because Maya handled their requests with efficiency and patience. But there was one category of customer that tested Maya's composure more than any other: the rich teenagers who came in acting like they owned the place because their parents owned half the town. Most of them were just spoiled and entitled, tipping poorly and treating service workers like they were invisible. annoying, but manageable. But then there was Chase Huntington III, and he was in a category all his own. Chase was 17, though he wouldn't turn 18 until September. The only son of Chase Huntington Jr. and Victoria Ashford Huntington, whose combined family wealth was estimated somewhere north of $200 million. The Huntingtons owned a massive estate on the bluffs overlooking the ocean, along with investment properties throughout Cedar Bay. Chase Jr. sat on multiple corporate boards and had political aspirations. Victoria chaired various charity committees and was known for her perfectly styled appearance and her completely tone-deaf comments about poor people just needing to work harder and make better choices. Their son, Chase III, had been raised with every advantage money could provide and absolutely no sense of responsibility or consequence. He attended an exclusive private school in Los Angeles during the academic year, but spent summers in Cedar Bay, where he terrorized the local teenagers and tormented anyone in the service industry unfortunate enough to cross his path. He was tall and athletic, with the kind of conventionally handsome features that came from generations of genetic privilege, sun-bleached hair that probably cost $200 a cut, and an expression of perpetual condescension that made people want to punch him on sight. He drove a BMW M4 that cost more than most people in Cedar Bay earned in 2 years, and he treated it like it was an extension of his identity, which, in many ways, it was. Chase had been coming into the Ocean View Grill since he was 14, and in those 3 years, he had never once been polite to staff, never tipped more than $1 regardless of the bill, and had made countless waitresses cry with his cruel comments about their appearance, intelligence, or socioeconomic status. Tony Castellano had banned him twice, but each time Chase's father had called with thinly veiled threats about making things difficult for the restaurant, and Tony had reluctantly rescinded the ban. He had a business to run and employees to protect, and going to war with the Huntingtons wasn't a battle he could win. So the staff at Ocean View Grill had developed strategies for dealing with Chase. They rotated who had to serve him, so no one person had to endure him too frequently. They warned new employees about him. They had a code phrase: "Table 7 needs extra attention." That signaled Chase was in the building, and everyone should be on alert. And they supported each other through his abuse, because that's what it was. Abuse of power, abuse of position, abuse of people who couldn't fight back without risking their livelihoods. On this particular Saturday afternoon in mid-July, Maya had been working since 6 in the morning and was scheduled until closing at 10. It was tourist season, the restaurant was packed, and she was managing 6 tables simultaneously with the kind of controlled chaos that experienced servers make look easy. She was tired, her feet hurt, and she had already dealt with 3 difficult customers. But she maintained her professional smile and courteous demeanor, because that was the job. When Chase Huntington III walked in with 4 of his equally obnoxious friends, Maya felt her stomach sink. She watched Tony's face fall as he saw them, watched him look around at his staff, and she made the decision before he could assign them to anyone else. "I'll take them," she said quietly. "It's fine. I can handle it." Tony looked at her with gratitude and concern. "You sure, Maya? You've already had a rough day." "I'm sure. Better me than Jenny. She's new and he'll make her cry." Maya had seen Chase reduce their newest waitress to tears just the week before with comments about her weight and intelligence. She approached the table where Chase and his friends had sprawled across chairs like they owned them, already loud and disruptive, attracting annoyed glances from other diners. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to Ocean View Grill. Can I start you with some drinks?" Chase looked up at her with that expression of contempt she had seen 100 times before. "Oh, great. We get the scholarship case. Tell me, Maria, are you here legally? Should I call ICE?" Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "My name is Maya, and yes, I was born in Riverside County. Now, what can I get you to drink?" "Wow, defensive much. I was just asking a question." Chase smirked at his friends, who laughed on cue like the followers they were. "I'll have a Perrier. Make sure it's cold. Not room temperature, not sort of cold. Actually cold. Think you can handle that, or is it too complicated?" "Perrier, cold. Got it. And for the rest of you." Maya took the other orders, maintaining her composure despite the racial slur disguised as a question and the casual cruelty that Chase deployed like other people breathed. She brought their drinks, took their food orders, and served them with the same professionalism she showed every customer, ignoring the comments they made just loud enough for her to hear about the help and people who should be grateful to have jobs. She had dealt with racism and classism before. It was an unfortunate reality of working in a tourist town where wealthy people sometimes treated locals like they were part of the scenery rather than human beings. But what happened next crossed a line that even Chase had never crossed before. Maya brought Chase his burger exactly as he'd ordered it. Medium rare, no onions, extra pickles, sweet potato fries instead of regular. She placed it in front of him with his requested side of ranch dressing and a fresh, cold Perrier. Chase looked at the bottle of Perrier, then up at Maya with an expression of exaggerated disgust. "What is this?" "Your Perrier, sir, as requested." "Are you stupid? I asked for it cold. This isn't cold." Maya had personally checked the bottle. It was cold, exactly as he'd requested, straight from the refrigerator. "Sir, I assure you it's cold. It came directly from—" "Are you arguing with me?" Chase's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby tables. "I said it's not cold enough. Are you calling me a liar?" "No, sir, I'm just—" "You know what? I don't have time for incompetent service from people who probably can't even afford to eat here." Chase picked up the bottle of Perrier, opened it, and before Maya could process what was happening, he poured half of it over her head. The cold water soaked through her hair, ran down her face, and drenched her uniform. Maya stood frozen in shock. Water dripping from her chin, her carefully maintained composure shattered. The restaurant had gone silent. Every conversation stopped. Every diner turned to stare at the scene unfolding. But Chase wasn't done. While Maya stood there stunned and humiliated, he looked directly at her and spit in her face. The deliberate, contemptuous gesture of someone who viewed another human being as less than human, as so far beneath him that this level of degradation was not just acceptable, but amusing. His friends burst into laughter, filming on their phones, enjoying the show. Maya felt the spit on her cheek, and something inside her broke. Not her spirit. That was too strong for Chase Huntington III to destroy. But her composure, her carefully constructed professional facade. Tears spilled down her face, mixing with the water and the spit, and she turned and fled toward the kitchen, her hands shaking, her breath coming in gasps. Chase was still laughing, high-fiving his friends, saying something about teaching her a lesson, and maybe now she'll get the order right. What Chase didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to notice in his self-absorbed cruelty, was that the table in the corner booth had 10 men sitting at it. 10 men who had been enjoying a late lunch after a morning charity ride to raise money for the local children's hospital. 10 men wearing leather vests with patches that identified them as members of the Phantom Riders Motorcycle Club. These weren't weekend warriors or cosplay bikers. These were men who had been riding together for years, some for decades, bound by brotherhood and a code that valued loyalty, respect, and protection of the vulnerable above all else. They ranged in age from early 30s to late 60s, came from various backgrounds: mechanics, small business owners, a high school teacher, a former Marine, a contractor. But they were united in their commitment to their community and their absolute intolerance of bullies. The president of the chapter was a man named Marcus Hawk Dawson, 53 years old, who had founded the Phantom Riders 20 years earlier, after retiring from the Marine Corps. He was tall and solid, with silver threading through his dark beard, and he had the kind of calm, assessing gaze that came from years of leading men in high-pressure situations. He had seen a lot in his life: combat, loss, human nature at its worst and best, and very little surprised him anymore. But what he had just witnessed made his blood boil in a way few things could. All 10 men at the table had stopped eating the moment Chase poured water on Maya. When he spit in her face, they moved simultaneously, rising from their seats with the coordinated precision of men who had ridden together long enough to function as a single unit. Chase was still laughing when he noticed them approaching. His laughter died as 10 large, intimidating men in motorcycle club patches surrounded his table, their expressions making it clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Marcus stopped directly in front of Chase, looking down at him with an expression that would have terrified anyone with functional survival instincts. Chase tried to maintain his bravado, but his face had gone pale. "That girl you just assaulted," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying nonetheless to every corner of the now silent restaurant, "is 18 years old. She's working 2 jobs to pay for college. She served you with courtesy and professionalism, and you poured water on her, spit in her face, and humiliated her in front of this entire restaurant. Is that an accurate summary?" "I didn't assault anyone," Chase said, his voice wavering between defiance and fear. "She screwed up my order. I was just—" "You spit on her," interrupted another biker, a massive man named Bear who was 6'5" and built like his nickname suggested. "We all saw it. Everyone in this restaurant saw it. That's assault. That's a crime. And more importantly, that's the kind of behavior that tells us exactly what kind of person you are." "Do you know who my father is?" Chase tried, falling back on the defense that had always worked before. "We don't care who your father is," Marcus cut him off. "We don't care how much money your family has. We don't care about any of the things you think make you special. What we care about is that you just assaulted a young woman who was doing her job, and you did it because you think your money and status put you above consequences. We are here to teach you that you're wrong." Chase's friends were trying to become invisible, shrinking in their seats, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Chase himself was looking around for exits, for his father, for anyone who could save him from this situation. He found no salvation. Tony Castellano had emerged from the kitchen, where he had been comforting Maya. His face was set in hard lines. He had been wanting to do something about Chase for years, and here was his opportunity. "I've called the police," he announced. Assault charges will be filed, and Chase Huntington, you are permanently banned from this establishment. If you ever set foot in here again, you'll be arrested for trespassing." "You can't. My father will—" Chase sputtered. "Your father can do whatever he wants," Tony said coldly. "But I have a restaurant full of witnesses who watched you assault my employee. I have video from our security cameras, and I have had enough of you terrorizing my staff. Get out." Marcus wasn't done. He leaned down, bringing his face close to Chase's, his voice dropping to a level that only Chase and his immediate vicinity could hear. "Here's how this is going to work, kid. You're going to stand up. You're going to walk back into that kitchen, and you're going to apologize to Maya. A real apology, not the fake kind you've probably used to get out of trouble before. You're going to tell her you're sorry for assaulting her, that your behavior was inexcusable, and that she deserves better. And then you're going to wait here until the police arrive, and you're going to take responsibility for what you did. No calling daddy, no having lawyers make it disappear. Real consequences for real actions. Do you understand?" "And if I don't?" Chase tried to sound tough, but his voice cracked. "If you don't," Marcus continued, "then we're going to make absolutely certain that every single person in Cedar Bay knows exactly what kind of person you are. We're going to make sure this video—" He held up his phone, showing that he had recorded the entire incident. "Gets shown to everyone you know. Your school, your friends, your father's business associates, every college you might want to attend. We're going to make sure your reputation is exactly what it should be. That of a spoiled, cruel bully who assaults service workers for fun." Another biker, a man called Preacher, who got his nickname because he actually was an ordained minister, added, "Or you can choose to do the right thing. Apologize genuinely, face the legal consequences of your actions, and start the process of becoming a better person. Your choice, but you've got about 30 seconds to decide." Chase looked around at the ring of bikers surrounding him, at the restaurant full of people watching with varying expressions of satisfaction that someone was finally holding him accountable, at Tony standing with his arms crossed, and at the door to the kitchen where Maya had fled. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, Chase Huntington III realized that his money and his name weren't going to save him. He was facing real consequences, and no amount of his father's influence was going to make them disappear. He stood up on shaking legs and walked toward the kitchen, followed by Marcus and 2 other bikers, to ensure he didn't bolt for the exit. Maya was in the back, still crying, her wet hair dripping, her uniform soaked, being comforted by the kitchen staff and several waitresses who had dealt with Chase's abuse before and felt her pain personally. When Chase entered, escorted by the bikers, she looked up with red, swollen eyes, trying to compose herself. Chase stood there for a long moment, clearly struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. Finally, with Marcus's stern gaze boring into the back of his head, he spoke. "I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. I was cruel and I assaulted you, and I'm sorry." It wasn't eloquent, and it probably wasn't entirely sincere, but it was more accountability than Chase had ever shown for any of his actions. Maya nodded silently, not trusting her voice, and Chase turned and walked back to the dining room to wait for the police. The Cedar Bay Police Department arrived within minutes. They had been nearby when Tony called, and assault charges were serious business. Officer Patricia Morrison, a 15-year veteran who knew the Huntingtons well, and who had never liked how Chase conducted himself around town, took statements from witnesses, reviewed the security footage, and placed Chase under arrest for misdemeanor assault. "My father," Chase began as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "Your father will be notified, yes," Officer Morrison said crisply. "But you're 17 years old, which means you're being charged as a juvenile. However, the DA has discretion in cases like this, and with clear video evidence and multiple witnesses, I wouldn't count on this going away quietly." As Chase was led out to the patrol car, every person in the restaurant watched. Some looked satisfied, some looked shocked, but many looked like they were witnessing something they had been hoping to see for years. Chase Huntington III finally facing consequences. The phantom riders remained at their table, having resumed their seats once the police arrived. Marcus approached Maya, who had emerged from the kitchen, still shaken but with more composure than before. "You okay, miss?" "I think so," Maya said quietly. "Thank you. All of you. I've been dealing with him for 2 years, and nobody has ever—" "Thank you. Nobody should have to deal with that," Marcus said firmly. "And you shouldn't have had to wait for us to step in. We'll make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug. You have our word on that." One of the other bikers, a man named Doc, who was actually a high school science teacher in his non-riding life, added, "We're going to follow this case. Make sure it actually gets prosecuted. Make sure that kid faces real consequences and doesn't just have his daddy buy his way out of trouble. We've got connections with the DA's office, with victim advocacy groups. We'll make sure you're supported through this process." Tony came over, his expression a mixture of gratitude and residual anger. "Gentlemen, your meal is on the house. Thank you for doing what I should have done years ago." "You were protecting your business and your employees," Marcus said. "We understand the position you were in, but sometimes people like us who don't have as much to lose can afford to do what needs doing." Over the next week, the incident at Ocean View Grill became the talk of Cedar Bay. The video that Marcus had recorded went viral locally, shared thousands of times on social media, with commentary ranging from outrage at Chase's behavior to satisfaction that he had finally faced consequences. Chase Jr. and Victoria Huntington hired expensive lawyers, as expected. But they were up against something unusual, a mobilized community that was tired of watching their son terrorize service workers without consequences. The Phantom Riders made good on their promise. They reached out to victim advocacy groups who connected Maya with legal support. They contacted the DA's office and made it clear that the community was watching this case and expecting real justice, not the usual accommodation given to wealthy families. They organized a community meeting where service workers shared their stories of abuse from entitled customers, making it clear that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Maya, with support from the bikers and encouragement from her family, decided to pursue the case fully. She gave interviews to local media, describing not just the assault, but the pattern of behavior she and other workers had endured. She was articulate, sympathetic, and powerful, exactly the kind of victim who could sway public opinion and put pressure on the legal system. The Huntingtons tried their usual playbook. Chase Jr. called in favors. Victoria made strategic donations to various organizations, and their lawyers filed motions to dismiss. But something had changed in Cedar Bay. The community had rallied around Maya, and the case became symbolic of larger issues about class, privilege, and accountability. The DA, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who had always been quietly frustrated by how wealthy families received preferential treatment in her jurisdiction, saw an opportunity. She prosecuted the case aggressively, adding charges of battery and seeking more than the usual slap-on-the-wrist sentence for juvenile offenders. The Phantom Riders attended every court hearing, filling the gallery in their patches, a silent reminder that the community was watching and demanding justice. They organized letter-writing campaigns, collected witness statements from other service workers who had been abused by Chase, and generally made it impossible for the case to be quietly plea bargained away. Chase's lawyers tried to argue that he was just a kid, that he made a mistake, that he shouldn't have his future ruined over one incident. But the prosecution presented evidence of a pattern, testimonies from dozens of service workers about Chase's behavior over years, documentation of complaints that had been ignored or suppressed, evidence that this wasn't an aberration, but his normal mode of operation. The judge, an older woman named Sandra Martinez, who had worked her way through college as a waitress and who had zero tolerance for entitled rich kids, was not sympathetic. She found Chase guilty on all counts and sentenced him to the maximum penalty available in juvenile court: 6 months in a juvenile detention facility, 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service specifically in the service industry, mandatory anger management and empathy training, and a requirement to write personal apology letters to every person he had mistreated that could be documented. Furthermore, she ordered Chase to pay restitution to Maya for emotional distress, medical costs for therapy, and punitive damages. The total came to $50,000, a drop in the bucket for the Huntingtons, but symbolically significant. "Mr. Huntington," Judge Martinez said during sentencing, looking at Chase directly, "you have been raised in privilege and have interpreted that privilege as permission to treat people cruelly. You have hurt people because you could, because you faced no consequences, because you were taught that your family's money put you above normal social and legal standards. I'm here to tell you that you were taught wrong. Your actions have consequences. Your victim is a real person with feelings and dignity that you violated. And you are going to learn, through direct experience, what it means to be treated the way you have treated others," she continued. "Your community service will be served in fast food restaurants, as a busboy, where you will experience firsthand what it's like to be on the receiving end of customer behavior. Your probation officer will check in weekly. Any violation, any hint that you're not taking this seriously, and you'll serve the remainder of your sentence as an adult in county jail once you turn 18. Do I make myself clear?" Chase, pale and chastened, nodded. His parents sat in the gallery, looking furious and humiliated, not at their son's behavior, but at the fact that they hadn't been able to buy his way out of it. Maya, sitting with Marcus and several other Phantom Riders, felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Vindicated. Justice had been done. The system had worked because people had made it work, because they had refused to let it be business as usual. But the story didn't end with the sentencing. The Phantom Riders had one more intervention planned, and this one would be the most transformative of all. Marcus approached Maya after the hearing. "We want to do something for you. The club has a scholarship fund that we maintain for students pursuing higher education who demonstrate character and resilience. We'd like to award you the full $15,000 you need for your first year at UCSB." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I can't. That's too much. I can work. I can save." "You've been working," Marcus interrupted gently. "You've been busting your ass for 2 years, saving every penny. You maintained perfect grades while working double shifts. You dealt with abuse from entitled customers with grace and professionalism. And when you were assaulted, you stood up and fought for justice, not just for yourself, but for every service worker who's been in your position. You've earned this scholarship 10 times over." Another biker, a woman named Raven, who was the club's treasurer, added, "We give this scholarship every year to someone who embodies what we value: hard work, integrity, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. This year, that's you, Maya. Please let us do this." Maya accepted with tears streaming down her face, hugging these tough-looking bikers who had become her unexpected champions and protectors. But they still weren't done. The club organized a fundraiser, a motorcycle ride and barbecue, with all proceeds going to create the Maya Rodriguez Service Workers Defense Fund, a resource to provide legal support and counseling for service industry workers facing harassment and assault. The event raised over $80,000 and became an annual tradition in Cedar Bay. Meanwhile, Chase began his sentence. The 6 months in juvenile detention were harder than anything he had experienced in his comfortable life. He was surrounded by kids who had grown up with real problems, real consequences, and no safety net of wealth to catch them. He learned what it was like to be powerless, to be judged harshly, to have no control over his circumstances. When he was released and began his community service, he discovered that working in food service was exhausting, stressful, and humbling. He experienced firsthand what it was like to be on the receiving end of customer rudeness, to be treated as invisible or inferior, to work hard for minimum wage while dealing with people who treated you like garbage. One day, about 8 months into his community service, Chase was bussing tables at a fast food restaurant when he looked up and saw Marcus and several other phantom riders sitting at a table, watching him. He froze, fear flashing across his face, but Marcus just nodded to him and continued his conversation with his brothers. After they finished eating and left, Chase found a note on their table, along with a $20 tip for the busboy. "How you're treated matters. How you treat others matters more. Keep learning." The phantom riders. Chase kept that note. Over the course of his probation, something began to change in him. It wasn't a sudden transformation. Entitlement and cruelty, that deep-rooted, don't disappear overnight, but gradually, through direct experience of what he had inflicted on others, through mandated therapy that forced him to examine his behavior and beliefs, through the humiliation of consequences, something shifted. By the time his probation ended, Chase was not the same person who had spit in Maya's face. He had completed his community service, written sincere apology letters to dozens of people he had wronged, and begun to understand how his privilege had distorted his view of other people's humanity. He made a decision that shocked his parents. Instead of going to an elite private college, he enrolled in community college and got a job working at a restaurant, voluntarily this time. He wanted to continue learning the lessons that his sentence had started teaching him. 1 year after the incident, Chase did something that surprised everyone. He showed up at Ocean View Grill on a quiet Tuesday afternoon and asked to speak to Maya. Tony called her, and she came out cautiously, ready to flee if needed. "I wanted to..." Chase struggled for words, then tried again. "I wanted to apologize again, for real this time. I wrote you a letter because the court made me. But that wasn't enough. I was a monster to you. I was a monster to so many people. There's no excuse for how I acted. I've been working in restaurants for a year now, and I think about what I did to you every single day. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I understand now, really understand, what I did and how wrong it was. Maya studied him for a long moment. He looked different, humbler, tired in a way that came from actual work rather than manufactured teenage angst, and genuinely remorseful. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I don't know if I can forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever, but I appreciate that you're trying to become a better person." "I don't expect forgiveness," Chase said. "I just needed you to know that I'm trying, and that you were right to press charges, right to fight back. You changed my life, even though I'm the one who hurt you. I'm grateful for that, which I know sounds weird, but it's true." After Chase left, Tony came over to where Maya was standing. "What do you think?" "I think people can change," Maya said thoughtfully. "I think consequences matter. I think the system worked because good people made it work. And I think 10 bikers showing up that day saved more than just my dignity. They might have saved that kid from becoming an even worse human being." Maya went to UCSB that fall, funded by the Phantom Riders Scholarship. She thrived there, studying sociology with a focus on labor rights and class dynamics. She volunteered with organizations supporting service workers, and she became an advocate for stronger protections against workplace harassment and assault. The Phantom Riders became regular fixtures at Ocean View Grill, and Maya developed a genuine friendship with several club members. They attended her college graduation 4 years later, cheering louder than anyone when she walked across the stage. They were there again when she graduated with her master's degree in social work, and when she opened the first Worker Justice Center of Cedar Bay, a non-profit providing legal support and advocacy for service industry workers. Chase, meanwhile, continued his transformation. He transferred to a 4-year university after 2 years at community college, studying social work and counseling. He volunteered with at-risk youth, using his own story as a cautionary tale about privilege, cruelty, and the importance of consequences. He eventually became a counselor working with court-ordered youth, helping kids who had made serious mistakes understand the impact of their actions and choose better paths. 5 years after the incident, Maya was giving a presentation at a conference about worker rights when she saw Chase in the audience. After her talk, he approached her hesitantly. "Your work is amazing," he said. "You're helping so many people. I just wanted you to know that seeing what you've built, knowing that you turned that terrible experience into something that's making the world better, it inspires me to keep trying to make amends for who I was." Maya looked at him. This young man, who had once spit in her face, who had been cruel and privileged and terrible, who had been forced to face consequences and had chosen to actually learn from them instead of becoming bitter. "You know what, Chase? I forgive you, not because you earned it, necessarily, but because holding onto that anger doesn't serve me anymore. You did a terrible thing, but you've spent years trying to become better. That matters." They didn't become friends exactly, but they developed a mutual respect. Chase occasionally volunteered at Maya's Worker Justice Center, helping with youth outreach, and Maya sometimes spoke to the counseling groups Chase ran with court-ordered teens, sharing her story from the victim's perspective. The Phantom Riders continued their community work, their intervention with Maya becoming a template for how they handled similar situations. They developed a reputation as protectors of service workers, and their presence in restaurants and businesses throughout Cedar Bay had a noticeable effect. People were more respectful to staff when bikers were around, knowing that mistreatment wouldn't be tolerated. 10 years after the incident, there was a reunion of sorts at Ocean View Grill. Maya, now a successful advocate and non-profit director, organized an event celebrating a decade of the Worker Justice Center. The Phantom Riders were there in force, along with dozens of service workers whose lives had been changed by Maya's organization. And surprisingly, Chase was there too, invited by Maya, having become an ally in the movement to protect service workers and hold privileged abusers accountable. During the event, Marcus gave a toast. 10 years ago, we walked into this restaurant for lunch after a charity ride. We witnessed something that made our blood boil. A young woman being assaulted by a spoiled rich kid who thought his money meant he could treat people like garbage. We did what we do. We stepped in, we held him accountable, and we made sure justice was done. But here's what we didn't know then. That intervention would spark something bigger than any of us imagined. Maya didn't just get justice, she built a movement. Chase didn't just face consequences, he became a better person. And our club didn't just help one person, we started a ripple effect that's still spreading. He raised his glass. To Maya, for her courage and her vision, to second chances and real change, and to the power of standing up for what's right. Even when, especially when, the person you're standing up to has more money and power than you do. Some battles are worth fighting, and some people are worth protecting. This was both. Everyone raised their glasses, and in that moment, the interconnected lives of a waitress, a rich teen, and 10 bikers who happened to be watching came full circle, demonstrating that justice, accountability, and transformation were all possible when people cared enough to act. The story of what happened that day at Ocean View Grill became part of Cedar Bay's local law, told and retold as an example of community justice, the importance of standing up for service workers, and the reality that privilege doesn't protect anyone from consequences when people unite to demand accountability. And every time the Phantom Riders rode through Cedar Bay, they made a point, I continuato stop at Ocean View Grill. It had become tradition, a pilgrimage of sorts to the place where they had stood up for what was right and inadvertently changed multiple lives forever. Tony Castellano eventually retired and handed the restaurant over to his son Michael. But before he did, he installed a plaque near the entrance. It read, "In this restaurant, we treat every person with dignity and respect. Service workers are valued members of our community. Abuse will not be tolerated. Thank you to the Phantom Riders MC for reminding us all that standing up for others is everyone's responsibility." The plaque became something of a tourist attraction. People would come specifically to see the restaurant where that viral video happened, where a rich kid learned consequences, and where bikers became unlikely heroes. Michael Castellano kept a folder of news clippings and social media posts about the incident, showing them to interested customers and using the story to train new employees about the restaurant's zero-tolerance policy for customer abuse. Maya's Worker Justice Center expanded beyond Cedar Bay, opening satellite offices in 3 other California coastal towns where service industry workers faced similar challenges. Her organization provided free legal consultation, connected workers with pro bono attorneys, offered counseling services, and even ran training programs, teaching service workers about their rights and how to document harassment and abuse. The center also partnered with the Phantom Riders and other motorcycle clubs throughout California to create the Guardians in Leather program. Participating clubs would adopt local restaurants and businesses, making regular appearances to demonstrate community support and serving as visible reminders that workers had protectors. The program reduced incidents of customer abuse by over 40% in participating establishments. Maya was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and labor rights conventions across the country. She told her story, the humiliation, the assault, the bikers who stood up for her, the justice she received, and the movement she built from that experience. She always credited the Phantom Riders with not just protecting her that day, but with showing her that ordinary people had the power to demand justice and create change. I was 18 years old, soaking wet, with spit on my face, feeling more powerless than I'd ever felt in my life, she would tell audiences. And then 10 men in leather jackets stood up and said, "This is not okay." They didn't know me. They had nothing to gain. They just saw injustice and decided to act. That's what heroes do. They show up when it matters. And that day taught me that I could be that person too. I could be someone who shows up when others need help. That's what the Worker Justice Center is. All of us showing up for each other. Chase's transformation continued to deepen over the years. He completed his master's degree in counseling and began working specifically with court-ordered youth from wealthy families, kids who reminded him of who he used to be. He developed a program called Privilege and Responsibility that was eventually adopted by several juvenile courts as an alternative sentencing option for affluent young offenders. The program forced participants to work minimum wage service jobs, attend empathy training, meet with victims of similar crimes, and confront how their privilege had insulated them from understanding the impact of their actions. It was controversial. Some called it cruel, others called it brilliant, but the recidivism rate among participants was remarkably low. Kids who completed Chase's program rarely reoffended, and many, like Chase himself, went on to become advocates for service workers and allies in fighting entitlement and abuse. Chase also did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He wrote a book called The Cost of Privilege: How Facing Consequences Saved My Life. It was a brutally honest memoir about his upbringing, his behavior, the assault, his arrest and sentencing, and his journey toward becoming a better person. He donated all proceeds to Maya's Worker Justice Center. The book became an unexpected bestseller, sparking conversations about how wealthy families raise children, about the dangers of privilege without accountability, and about whether people who do terrible things can truly change. Chase appeared on talk shows and podcasts, always emphasizing that his story wasn't about redemption. "I don't get to declare myself redeemed," he would say, "but about accountability, consequences, and the ongoing work of becoming less terrible." He was always clear. "I'm not the hero of this story. Maya is the hero. The Phantom Riders are the heroes. I'm the villain who was forced to face consequences and chose to learn from them instead of becoming bitter. That's the bare minimum of decent behavior, not something deserving of praise. But if my story can help other privileged kids understand that their actions have real impacts on real people, and if it can help parents understand that protecting kids from consequences is actually harming them, then maybe some good can come from the terrible things I did." The Huntington family never recovered their reputation in Cedar Bay. Chase Jr.'s political aspirations died when his son's assault case became national news. Victoria's charity committees politely asked her to step down when her tone-deaf defense of her son, "Boys will be boys," she had said initially, before expensive PR consultants advised her to shut up, was widely circulated and criticized. The family eventually sold their Cedar Bay estate and moved full-time to their Los Angeles residence, unable to face the community that had witnessed their son's crimes and their failure to raise him properly. Ironically, this exile from Cedar Bay was what finally got through to them. Away from the community where their name had once meant something, forced to confront how their son's behavior had destroyed their social standing, they began their own journey of self-examination. They started attending family therapy with Chase, where they had to face how their parenting, the unlimited money without responsibility, the cleaning up of every mess, the implicit message that rules didn't apply to Huntingtons, had created a monster. Chase Jr. eventually wrote an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times titled, "I failed my son by protecting him from consequences." It was surprisingly honest about how his wealth and ego had combined to create a parenting approach that harmed his child and everyone his child encountered. "I thought I was being a good father by shielding him from punishment," he wrote. "I was actually teaching him that other people weren't real, that their feelings didn't matter, that money could solve any problem. I was wrong, and my son paid the price. More importantly, his victims paid the price. I cannot undo the harm my parenting caused, but I can tell other wealthy parents, consequences are not cruelty. Accountability is not abuse. If you truly love your children, let them face the results of their actions." The op-ed went viral and sparked a broader conversation about wealthy parenting and the affluenza defense that rich families often used when their children committed crimes. Chase Jr. became an unlikely voice for accountability, speaking at parenting conferences and donating significant money to programs that taught empathy and responsibility to privileged youth. Back in Cedar Bay, the ripple effects continued to spread. Ocean View Grill became a model for how restaurants could protect their workers, and Tony's zero-tolerance policy was adopted by dozens of other establishments throughout the region. Worker protection signs went up in restaurants, retail stores, and service businesses. "Our employees deserve respect. Harassment and abuse are not tolerated. Offenders will be banned and prosecuted." The Phantom Riders expanded their community protection work beyond service workers, establishing programs to help domestic violence victims, support homeless veterans, provide transportation for elderly people to medical appointments, and mentor at-risk youth. Their charity rides raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for local causes, and their reputation evolved from scary bikers to community protectors. Marcus retired as club president at age 65, handing the position to Doc, the school teacher. At his retirement party, attended by what seemed like half of Cedar Bay, including the mayor, police chief, and dozens of service workers whose lives had been touched by the club's advocacy, Maya gave a speech that brought the room to tears. "Marcus and the Phantom Riders showed up on the worst day of my working life," she said. "They didn't have to. Nobody would have blamed them for just finishing their lunch and leaving. But they saw injustice and they acted, and that choice rippled out in ways none of us could have imagined. My Justice Center has helped over 3,000 workers in 10 years. Chase's program has rehabilitated hundreds of privileged offenders. The Guardians in Leather program has made workplaces safer across California. And all of it traces back to 10 men who stood up when it mattered. That's the power of choosing to act, That's the power of refusing to be a bystander. That's the power of saying, "Not on my watch." She turned to Marcus directly. "You told me once that you stepped in because it was the right thing to do. Nothing more complicated than that." But Marcus, doing the right thing when it's hard, when it's uncomfortable, when it would be easier to look away, that's exactly what makes someone a hero. You changed my life. You probably saved Chase's life by forcing him to face consequences. You definitely made Cedar Bay a better, safer place. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you for everything. Marcus, uncomfortable with praise as always, simply nodded and raised his beer. "To doing the right thing," he said. "May we all have the courage to stand up when it matters." "To doing the right thing," the room echoed. 15 years after the incident, a documentary filmmaker named Jennifer Wu made a film called Standing Up, the Ocean View Grill Story. It traced the entire arc: the assault, the intervention, the trial, Maya's center, Chase's transformation, the broader movement for worker protection. The film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was eventually picked up by a major streaming service, where it reached millions of viewers. The documentary reignited conversations about class, privilege, accountability, and the service industry. It sparked a wave of similar worker protection programs across the country. Several states passed stronger laws against assaulting service workers, making it a specific criminal category with enhanced penalties. Restaurant chains and retail corporations revised their policies to better protect employees from customer abuse. Maya, now in her 30s and a nationally recognized advocate, appeared on The Daily Show, where the host asked her what she would say to her 18-year-old self on that terrible day. "I would tell her that the worst moment of her life was about to become the catalyst for the best work of her life," Maya answered. "I would tell her that those 10 scary-looking bikers walking toward her weren't a threat, but a blessing. I would tell her that justice is possible when people care enough to fight for it. And I would tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that she's going to turn her pain into purpose, and that she's going to spend her life making sure other workers don't have to go through what she went through. That would have helped. That would have given me hope in that moment when I felt hopeless." Chase, who had declined to be interviewed for the documentary, but had given his blessing for his story to be told, watched the film alone in his apartment. He cried through most of it, seeing Maya describe her trauma, seeing the footage of his younger self being so casually cruel, seeing the consequences that had felt so devastating at the time, but which he now understood, had saved him from becoming something irredeemable. After the film ended, he wrote Maya an email. "I watched the documentary. Seeing what I did to you, really seeing it from outside my own experience, made me understand even more deeply how terrible I was. I'm sorry. I will always be sorry. But I'm also grateful for the consequences, for the bikers who forced me to face what I'd done, for you refusing to let it go, for the judge who gave me real punishment. I'm grateful because without all of that, I would have kept being that person, kept hurting people, kept thinking my money made me special. Instead, I got to become someone different. I'll never stop trying to earn that second chance. Thank you for letting me try." Maya wrote back. "I'm grateful too. Grateful that something good came from something terrible. Grateful that you chose to actually change instead of just pretending. Grateful that we both turned that moment into something meaningful. You're proof that people can change when they face real consequences and do the hard work. Keep going. 20 years after the incident, Ocean View Grill held a commemoration event. Maya was there, now the director of a national worker rights organization. Chase was there, running a successful counseling practice and rehabilitation program. The Phantom Riders were there, 3 generations of club members representing decades of community service. And hundreds of service workers were there, people whose lives had been changed by the movement that started with 1 assault, 10 bikers, and a community's decision to demand justice. Tony Castellano, now in his 80s, gave a short speech. 20 years ago, something terrible happened in my restaurant. A young woman I cared about was assaulted by a spoiled kid who thought he was above consequences. I was angry at myself for not protecting her better, for not banning that kid permanently years earlier. But then, something beautiful happened. My customers became her protectors. 10 men I barely knew stood up and said, "No more." And from that moment of injustice came 2 decades of justice, of changed lives, of a movement that's made the world a little bit better. That's the lesson. Bad things happen, but good people can transform them into something meaningful if they refuse to look away. He turned to a covered frame on the wall. Tonight, we're unveiling something permanent to commemorate what happened here and what came from it. He pulled off the cloth to reveal a large artistic piece, a photograph of Maya at 18 in her Ocean View Grill uniform, flanked by images of the 10 Phantom Riders who had stood up for her, with text below that read, "On this spot in July 2025, injustice occurred and justice answered. Maya Rodriguez was assaulted while serving customers. 10 members of the Phantom Riders Motorcycle Club witnessed it and refused to stay silent. Their intervention sparked a movement that has protected thousands of workers, transformed countless lives, and reminded us all that heroes show up when it matters. May we all have the courage to stand up when we witness injustice. May we all be protectors of the vulnerable. May we all remember that doing the right thing matters more than doing the comfortable thing." The room erupted in applause. Maya hugged Marcus, who was now 73 and still riding. Chase stood in the back, crying quietly, grateful for the consequences that had given him a chance to become better. Service workers throughout the room felt seen, valued, and protected. And the Phantom Riders, tough men and women who lived by a code of honor and protection, felt the deep satisfaction of knowing their choice to act had mattered more than they could have imagined. That night, as the event wound down and people began to leave, a young waitress approached Maya nervously. She couldn't have been more than 19, wearing the same style uniform Maya had worn 20 years earlier. "Ms. Rodriguez, I just wanted to say thank you. I work here now, and I've never been treated badly by a customer, never been afraid, because everyone knows what happened here, and everyone knows we are protected. You gave us that. You and those bikers. You made it safe to do this job with dignity. Thank you." Maya hugged her, feeling the circle complete. "You deserve to work with dignity," she said. "Every worker does. Don't ever forget that." As Maya left Ocean View Grill that night, walking past the memorial plaque, past the spot where she had stood soaking wet with spit on her face, feeling powerless, she reflected on the strange journey from victim to advocate, from that terrible moment to this meaningful life. She thought about the 10 bikers who had stood up without hesitation. She thought about the community that had rallied around her. She thought about the justice system that had actually worked when people demanded it. She thought about Chase, who had been forced to face consequences and had chosen transformation over bitterness. She thought about the thousands of workers whose lives were better because people had refused to accept injustice. And she thought about her 18-year-old self, crying in that kitchen, not knowing that the worst moment of her life was about to become the foundation for everything meaningful she would build. If she could talk to that girl now, she would tell her what she told herself every day. You are not powerless. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And when you stand up for yourself, you stand up for everyone who comes after you. Keep going. It gets better. And you're going to help make it better for so many others. The Phantom Riders rode out of Cedar Bay as the sun set, their engines rumbling in that distinctive chorus that had become a sound of comfort and safety in the town. They had charity rides to plan, communities to serve, and vulnerable people to protect. Because that's what they did. That's who they were. And 20 years after standing up for a waitress named Maya, they were still showing up when it mattered. Behind them, Ocean View Grill's lights stayed on, a beacon of dignity and respect for service workers, a symbol of what happens when good people refuse to be bystanders, and a reminder that sometimes the scariest-looking strangers turn out to be exactly the heroes you need. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about justice, courage, and unexpected heroes. Share this video with someone who works in the service industry. They deserve to know they matter and they're protected. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed injustice and stood up? Your story could inspire others to act. Because Maya's lesson lives on. We all have the power to be someone's protector. We all have the responsibility to stand up when it matters. Be the biker who doesn't look away. Be the voice for someone who feels powerless. Be the change. Thank you for watching.